You think you're making choices. You're not. You're running software installed decades ago by people who didn't know what they were doing. Every morning you wake up and perform the same ritual. Same coffee, same route to work, same complaints, same arguments with the same people about the same things. You call this your life, but it's just a pattern repeating itself until you die. And the worst part? You defend these patterns as if they were your personality when they're just scars pretending to be identity. Have you noticed how you keep choosing the same type of person to date even after they destroy you? How you sabotage every good opportunity right before it pays off? How you promise yourself you'll change, and then 2 weeks later you're exactly where you started? That's not weakness. That's not bad luck. That's pattern lock. Your brain running the same program over and over because it's safer to fail in familiar ways than to succeed in unknown ones. Sigmund Freud called this repetition compulsion, the unconscious drive to recreate traumatic situations, hoping that this time the outcome will be different. It never is. But your mind keeps trying because the known hell feels safer than the unknown heaven. You're not living. You're rehearsing the same scene from a play that closed decades ago. Think about your last 5 arguments with your partner. Strip away the details, and you'll see they're all the same fight wearing different costumes, the same emotional pattern, the same defensive moves, the same ending. You're not fighting about dishes or money or who said what. You're fighting with ghosts from childhood, reacting to wounds so old you don't even remember getting them. Your partner just happens to be standing in the spot where the real enemy used to be. Carl Jung went deeper. He said these patterns aren't just personal, they're archetypal. Humanity has been running the same psychological programs for thousands of years. The abandoned child looking for approval, the wounded warrior proving his worth through suffering, the betrayed lover who never trusts again. These aren't your unique problems. They're ancient scripts that your psyche downloaded and now plays on repeat. You think you're being authentic when you're just acting out a role written long before you were born. The pattern doesn't care about your happiness. It cares about survival. And survival means staying predictable, staying safe, staying small. But here's where it gets worse. B.F. Skinner showed us that these patterns get reinforced every single time they produce any result, even a painful one. Your brain doesn't distinguish between good attention and bad attention. It just registers that the behavior produced a response, so it files that behavior under works and runs it again next time. This is why you keep doing things that hurt you, because deep in your nervous system, hurt equals connection. And connection equals survival. So you pick fights to feel alive. You create drama to feel important. You sabotage success to feel familiar. The loop tightens every time you run it. What started as a coping mechanism in childhood becomes a prison in adulthood. And you're both the prisoner and the guard. Most people live their entire lives inside these loops and never question them. They think their anxiety is just how they are. They think their anger is justified. They think their loneliness is circumstantial. But it's not circumstantial, it's structural. Your suffering has architecture. And that architecture was built by experiences you can barely remember, by messages you absorbed before you could speak, by a nervous system trying to make sense of chaos using the only tools it had at age 5. The problem is you're still using those tools at age 50. You're navigating adult complexity with childhood software, and then you wonder why nothing works. The pattern lock doesn't announce itself. It operates in the background like malware, redirecting every new experience through old filters. You meet someone kind, and your brain immediately searches for how they'll hurt you. You get a promotion, and your mind starts cataloging all the ways you don't deserve it. You feel happy, and within minutes you're manufacturing problems to bring yourself back down to your emotional baseline. Because happiness feels dangerous when you've been programmed for suffering. Peace feels wrong when you've been trained for war. Your nervous system has a comfort zone, and that zone is shaped by your earliest wounds. Anything outside that zone triggers alarm bells. So you self-sabotage back to familiar misery and call it fate. Here's what nobody tells you about patterns. They feel like truth. They feel like who you are. Challenging them feels like dying because in a way it is. It's the death of the false self you built to survive circumstances that no longer exist. But that false self is loud. It has opinions, it has fears, it has an entire narrative about why change is dangerous and why staying stuck is wisdom. So you listen to it, you trust it, you let it drive while you sit in the back seat wondering why you keep ending up in the same places with different addresses. If you've made it this far, you're already doing something most people never do. You're looking at the code instead of just running it. And that's the first crack in the pattern. Because awareness is the only thing these loops can't survive. They need darkness to function. The moment you shine light on them, they start to lose power. Your childhood didn't give you a personality. It gave you a survival strategy, and you've been mistaking that strategy for your identity ever since. Every behavior that feels like you is actually just an adaptation to circumstances that no longer exist. The quiet kid who learned to disappear grows into an adult who can't speak up in meetings. The parentified child who took care of everyone becomes the adult who can't ask for help. The scapegoat who got blamed for everything turns into the adult who apologizes for existing. These aren't character traits, they're combat wounds, and you're still fighting a war that ended 30 years ago. Freud described this as the eternal return of the repressed. What you refuse to feel consciously, you're forced to repeat behaviorally. The anger you couldn't express as a child becomes the rage you can't control as an adult. The grief you weren't allowed to show becomes the depression you can't shake. The fear you had to hide becomes the anxiety that runs your life. Your body keeps the score even when your mind pretends to forget. And the patterns loop because the emotion never got processed, never got released, never got acknowledged. So it keeps knocking, keeps demanding attention, keeps hijacking your behavior until you finally turn around and face it. Think about the last time someone gave you genuine praise. What happened inside you? Did you deflect it, minimize it, change the subject? That's pattern lock. Your nervous system couldn't integrate the positive input because it contradicts your core programming. If you were raised by criticism, praise feels like a trap. If you survived by being invisible, being seen feels like exposure. If you got love only when you performed, unconditional acceptance feels suspicious. So your system rejects what it needs most and gravitates toward what hurts, because hurt is familiar, and familiar feels like home. Jung called these patterns complexes, autonomous psychological structures that operate like sub-personalities. You have a critic complex that sounds like your father, a victim complex that sounds like your mother, a rebel complex that activates whenever someone tells you what to do. These aren't really you. They're psychological fragments that took on a life of their own. They have their own agendas, their own triggers, their own ways of hijacking your conscious mind. When you're in the grip of a complex, you're not making decisions, you're being piloted by a pattern. And that pattern doesn't care about your goals, your values, or your well-being. It only cares about running its program. The really insidious part is how these patterns disguise themselves as preferences. You say you like being alone, when really you're terrified of intimacy. You say you're independent, when really you're afraid to need anyone. You say you're a perfectionist, when really you're running from shame. The pattern gives you a story that sounds reasonable, and you repeat that story until you believe it. But belief doesn't make it true. You're not discovering who you are, you're defending who you've been forced to become. There's a difference, and that difference is the gap between authentic selfhood and adapted survival. Skinner's research on operant conditioning shows exactly how this happens. Every time a behavior produces a reward, even an intermittent one, that behavior gets encoded deeper into your nervous system. This is why toxic relationships are so addictive. The intermittent reinforcement, the occasional crumb of affection after long stretches of nothing, creates the strongest behavioral conditioning possible. Your brain learns that if you just try harder, stay longer, tolerate more, eventually you'll get the love you need, but you won't. You're just strengthening a pattern that keeps you hooked on people who can't give you what you need. The pattern doesn't want you to leave. It wants you to keep trying because trying feels like hoping, and hoping feels better than accepting the truth. How many times have you said, "This is the last time," and then found yourself back in the same situation? That's not lack of willpower. That's pattern override. The conscious mind says no while the unconscious says yes, because yes is the only word it knows. Your conscious intentions are no match for unconscious programming. This is why positive thinking doesn't work. Why affirmations fail. Why New Year's resolutions collapse by February. You're trying to reprogram a system that doesn't speak the language of words. It speaks the language of felt experience, of body memory, of nervous system activation. Until you change the pattern at that level, you're just painting over rust. The pattern lock shows up everywhere once you start looking for it. In how you handle conflict, always either exploding or disappearing, never finding middle ground. In how you relate to money, either hoarding it out of scarcity or spending it to feel alive. In how you treat your body, either punishing it with control or abandoning it with neglect. Every area of dysfunction points back to the same core wound, the same unmet need, the same frozen moment in time when your system decided the world was unsafe and you had to adapt to survive. And you've been running that adaptation ever since, mistaking it for wisdom, calling it personality, defending it as if your life depends on it, because once upon a time it did. But not anymore. Now it's just keeping you small. If you've made it to this point, you're already supporting this work in a powerful way. Because every person who watches to the end, who reflects on this, who shares it with someone else, helps keep this message alive in a world that profits from keeping you blind to your own patterns. If you want to go deeper, if you want to help maintain this kind of raw, unfiltered psychology content, subscribe to this channel. And in the comments, tell me, what's the pattern you keep running that you know is destroying you, but you can't seem to stop? Because naming it is the first step to breaking it. Your relationships aren't random. They're pattern recognition. You keep choosing the same person in different bodies because your unconscious is trying to master an old wound by recreating it. Freud called this the repetition compulsion, but it's simpler than that. You're not actually trying to heal, you're trying to win a game you lost as a child, and you can't win because the game is rigged. The person you're dating isn't really there. They're a stand-in for your unavailable parent, your critical sibling, your first betrayal. You project the old wound onto the new face and then fight the same fight, hoping this time you'll get a different ending. You won't, because the ending isn't out there, it's in you. And until you stop casting people in roles they never auditioned for, you'll keep writing the same tragic script. Think about your type. Everyone has one. You're attracted to emotionally unavailable people who make you work for crumbs of affection. Or you're drawn to people who need saving so you can prove your worth through sacrifice. Or you chase people who remind you of chaos because peace feels boring and boring feels like death. That's not attraction, that's pattern recognition. Your nervous system scans every new person for markers of familiarity, and when it finds them, it floods you with chemistry and calls it love. But it's not love. It's an alarm going off that says this person will hurt you in the exact way you know how to be hurt, and your system interprets that as home. Jung understood this through the concept of projection. You don't see people as they are, you see them as your wounds need them to be. The confident partner you chose because they seemed strong is actually just emotionally shut down. The free-spirited lover you thought would save you from boredom is actually just avoidant and unreliable. The kind person you dismissed as boring was actually just healthy, and health felt foreign to a system calibrated for dysfunction. You can't recognize what you're not ready to receive, so you keep choosing what hurts and rejecting what heals. The pattern ensures you stay loyal to your wound, not to your well-being. This is why insight isn't enough. You can understand your patterns perfectly and still run them, because understanding happens in the neocortex, but the pattern lives in the limbic system. Your thinking brain knows you should choose differently, but your survival brain overrides that choice in milliseconds. When someone triggers your attachment wound, your neocortex goes offline. You're not making rational decisions anymore. You're in a flashback. You're 5 years old again, terrified of abandonment, willing to do anything to not be left. So you tolerate disrespect. You silence your needs. You perform and pretzel yourself into whatever shape will make them stay. And they leave anyway, or worse, they stay but withhold the one thing you need most. And you call that loyalty. You call that love. But it's just trauma bonding, two nervous systems locked in a dance. Neither one knows how to stop. Skinner's work on intermittent reinforcement explains why toxic relationships are more addictive than healthy ones. When someone gives you consistent love, your nervous system relaxes. When someone gives you love unpredictably, your nervous system becomes hypervigilant, constantly scanning for signs of approval or rejection. That vigilance feels like passion. That anxiety feels like aliveness. So you mistake dysfunction for depth and stability for boredom. You say you want a healthy relationship, but your body doesn't know what to do with one. Health doesn't trigger your survival responses. It doesn't activate your proving, your earning, your fighting. And if you're not fighting, you don't know how to feel connected. So you create problems where there are none. You pick fights to generate intensity. You withdraw to see if they'll chase you. You test and test until you break what could have been good, because good doesn't match your programming. The saddest part is watching people repeat these patterns across decades. First marriage looks like second marriage, looks like third marriage with different decor. Every breakup is the same story, with updated details. You think you're learning, but you're just collecting evidence to support the belief that was formed before you could speak, that you're unlovable, that people always leave. That intimacy equals pain, and your relationships become self-fulfilling prophecies. You choose people who confirm your worst fear, then point to them as proof that you were right all along. The pattern wins, you lose, and the cycle continues until you finally get angry enough, or exhausted enough, or conscious enough to stop. Breaking relationship patterns requires something most people aren't willing to do: be alone long enough to feel what you've been running from. Because every relationship you jump into is another anesthetic, another distraction from the core wound that drives the whole pattern. You can't heal a wound you won't look at. You can't change a pattern you won't sit with. And sitting with it means feeling the original pain, the one you've been avoiding by staying busy, staying coupled, staying distracted. It means admitting that no person can fix what was broken in you before you learned to walk. That the love you're chasing isn't out there, it's a past that can't be changed. And that realization is so devastating that most people would rather die repeating the pattern than live without it. But here's what happens when you finally break it. You stop looking for someone to complete you and start looking for someone to meet you. You stop choosing chemistry over compatibility. You stop confusing anxiety with excitement. You start noticing red flags on the first date instead of 6 months in. You develop the capacity to receive love instead of just chasing it. You learn that healthy relationships feel calm, not chaotic. That peace isn't boring, it's revolutionary for a nervous system that's only known war. And you realize that the relationship you've been searching for your entire life was never going to be found in another person. It was always going to be found in healing your relationship with yourself. Your career isn't stuck because of the economy or bad luck or lack of opportunity. It's stuck because you're running a pattern that was installed before you understood what work even meant. If you watched a parent break their back for scraps, you internalized that suffering equals virtue. If you saw them succeed and still feel empty, you learned that achievement is hollow. If they sacrificed everything for a job that destroyed them, you absorbed the belief that work is supposed to hurt. And now you're repeating their pattern or rebelling against it. But either way, you're not free. You're still dancing to music they played decades ago. Freud would say you're acting out an unconscious identification with your parents' relationship to work. You become them, or you become their opposite, but you never become yourself because you never questioned the pattern. Jung would add that you're also playing out a cultural archetype, the worker who martyrs himself, the rebel who refuses to conform, the achiever who climbs ladders that lead nowhere. These aren't your authentic desires, they're scripts handed down through generations, roles assigned by a society that needs your labor more than your fulfillment. And you perform them brilliantly, because performing is safer than discovering what you actually want. Think about how you self-sabotage at work. You're great until you're about to succeed. Then suddenly you make a stupid mistake, miss a deadline, pick a fight with your boss. That's not accident. That's pattern protection. Success feels dangerous to a system that associates visibility with punishment. So you stay small, stay safe, stay invisible. Or you do the opposite. You overwork until you collapse, proving your worth through exhaustion, because rest feels like laziness, and laziness feels like death. Either way, you're stuck in a loop where work becomes the place you reenact childhood wounds instead of the place you express adult capacity. Skinner's research on learned helplessness is relevant here. When you try repeatedly to change your situation and nothing works, your brain eventually stops trying. It learns that effort is pointless, that you have no control, that this is just how things are. So you settle. You stay in jobs that drain you because leaving feels impossible. You watch years pass in positions that insult your intelligence because movement feels more terrifying than stagnation. The pattern convinces you that you're trapped when really you're just loyal to an old belief that change is dangerous and staying put is survival. But surviving isn't living, and at some point you have to decide which one matters more. The career pattern also shows up in how you handle authority. If your parent was tyrannical, you either become the tyrant or you freeze around authority figures. You can't advocate for yourself in meetings. You can't negotiate your salary. You take feedback as personal attack even when it's constructive. Or you go the other way and become the rebel who can't respect any leadership, who sabotages every hierarchy, who gets fired from jobs not because you lack skill, but because you can't tolerate being managed. Both reactions are pattern lock. Both are ways your child self is still fighting or fleeing a parent who isn't even in the room. Here's the brutal truth about career patterns. Most people spend 40 years climbing a ladder they never wanted to climb, pursuing success as defined by people who don't know them, achieving goals that don't fulfill them, and calling it ambition. But it's not ambition, it's programming. You're chasing your father's approval that you never got. You're proving to your mother that you're good enough even though she's been dead for a decade. You're showing your high school bullies that you matter, but they're not watching and they don't care. The pattern keeps you running toward an approval that will never come, because it can only come from you, and you're the one person you refuse to give it to. This is why career coaching often fails. It tries to give you better strategies when your problem isn't strategic, it's systemic. You don't need a better resume, you need to understand why you're drawn to workplaces that replicate your family dysfunction. You don't need networking tips, you need to figure out why success terrifies you more than failure. You don't need a new job, you need a new relationship with work itself. And that requires going back to the moment when work became contaminated with survival, when effort became mixed with worth, when achievement became the only path to love. That's the pattern. And until you see it, you're just rearranging deck chairs on a sinking ship. The work pattern also intersects with your relationship pattern and your money pattern because they're all branches of the same root. If you learn that love has to be earned, you'll overwork to earn it. If you learn that you're only valuable when you're productive, you'll burn out trying to prove it. If you learn that rest is selfish, you'll feel guilty every time you stop. These beliefs don't live in your head, they live in your nervous system. They run automatically, unconsciously, relentlessly, and they'll keep running until you interrupt them with something stronger than willpower, with awareness that becomes action, with truth that becomes change, with patterns that become choices. Breaking the work pattern means getting honest about what you're actually doing every day and why. Are you working this hard because you love the work, or because you're afraid of what happens if you stop? Are you staying in this career because it fulfills you, or because leaving would mean admitting you wasted years? Are you climbing because you want the view from the top, or because you're terrified of being seen as ordinary? These questions don't have comfortable answers, but uncomfortable truth is always better than comfortable delusion. Because delusion keeps you stuck. Truth sets you free. Not immediately, not easily, but eventually. And eventually is better than never. Here's what nobody tells you about breaking patterns. It's not inspirational. It's not a hero's journey. It's more like surgery without anesthesia. You're awake for the whole thing, feeling every cut, watching pieces of yourself that you thought were essential get removed because they were never you. They were adaptations to pain. And for a while, you won't know who you are without them. You'll feel like you're disappearing, like you're becoming less instead of more. That's normal. That's the pattern fighting for its life. Because if it dies, the false self dies with it. And the false self has been running the show for so long that it thinks it's the only self you have. The process starts with radical honesty, not the kind of honesty where you admit small flaws while protecting the big ones. The kind where you look at your life and acknowledge that the story you've been telling yourself is mostly fiction, that you're not a victim of circumstance. You're a participant in a pattern, that the people who hurt you aren't the enemy, they're just actors you cast to play familiar roles, that your suffering isn't noble, it's habitual. This honesty will make you want to quit. It will make you defensive, angry, desperate to prove that your pain is special, that your situation is unique, that the pattern doesn't apply to you. Let yourself feel that, and then get honest anyway. Next comes the hardest part, sitting with the discomfort of not running the pattern. This means when your partner does something that usually triggers your abandonment wound, you don't react. You pause, you breathe. You feel the anxiety rising, and you don't discharge it through fighting, withdrawing, or creating drama. You just sit there with it, like sitting with a wild animal, until it calms down. At first, your nervous system will scream. It will interpret pause as danger because reaction equals survival in its programming. But reaction doesn't equal survival anymore. It equals repetition, and repetition equals prison. So you learn to tolerate the discomfort of breaking the loop, even though every cell in your body is begging you to run it. Jung said that we don't solve our problems, we outgrow them. We develop a new level of consciousness that makes the old problem irrelevant. That's what happens when you break pattern lock. You don't fix yourself, you evolve past the version of you that needed fixing. The abandoned child who drives your relationships, they don't go away, but they stop driving. They become a part of your history instead of your present. The traumatized worker who sabotages your success, they get integrated instead of in charge. The wounded parts don't need to be killed. They need to be witnessed, thanked for keeping you alive when you needed them, and gently retired from active duty. Practical application means catching yourself in the pattern and choosing differently, even when it feels wrong. It means dating someone who's actually available, even though they don't trigger your chemistry. It means staying in a job you're good at, instead of running when success gets close. It means asking for help instead of drowning in independence. It means resting without guilt, succeeding without sabotage, receiving love without suspicion. Each time you choose differently, you're writing new code. Each time you tolerate the discomfort of health, you're teaching your nervous system that safety can exist outside of suffering. It's slow, it's incremental, it's completely unsexy, but it works. Rogers believed in the power of unconditional positive regard, the capacity to witness yourself without judgment, not to excuse your patterns, but to understand them, to see that the part of you that keeps choosing wrong isn't evil, it's scared. It's a child making adult decisions with child logic. And you can't shame that child into changing. You have to parent it differently than it was parented. You have to show it that the danger is over, that the world has new possibilities, that love doesn't have to be earned through suffering. This isn't therapy speak. This is practical nervous system regulation. You literally have to prove to your body that the pattern is obsolete by living differently long enough that your system updates its threat assessment. The final piece is accepting that some patterns might never fully break. They might just loosen enough that you have choice. You'll still feel the pull toward the familiar, but you'll recognize it faster. You'll still get triggered, but you'll recover quicker. You'll still have moments where you slip back into old behavior, but you'll catch yourself sooner. This isn't failure. This is being human. The goal isn't perfection, it's awareness. The goal isn't to never run the pattern. It's to stop identifying with it. To know that you're not your wound, you're not your trauma, you're not your history. You're the one who can observe all of that and choose something different. Most people will never do this work. They'll live and die inside patterns they inherited, never questioning if there was another way. They'll blame circumstance, other people, bad luck, God. They'll keep themselves comfortable with the lie that they're victims when really they're unconscious participants. But you're still reading. You're still here. Which means some part of you is ready to see the code, to break the loop, to stop being controlled by programs installed before you could consent to them. That part of you is stronger than you think. That's the part worth listening to. If these ideas resonated with you, if something in this content cracked open a truth you've been avoiding, subscribe to this channel. There are 2 more videos appearing on your screen now that go even deeper into breaking the patterns that control you. And know this, the fact that you watched to the end means you're already changing. Most people turn away when the mirror gets too honest. You stayed. That courage is the beginning of freedom. The patterns that locked you in are the same patterns that will set you free once you learn to see them. You're not broken, you're just running old code, and code can be rewritten.